Good evening, everybody. I am so honored to be here with you all and talking to an organization that is so near and dear to my heart and a topic that I'm very passionate about. I am Dr. Amanda Adams, the Director of Research Coordination at Bat Conservation International. And I am also a Texan. I live in Bryan College Station. Um, and so this is also my home chapter of Dark Sky, and I also work with local initiatives here. So I'm really glad that I can be here talking with you all. But today I'm going to be talking about bats and the impact of artificial light at night on this very important taxa. All right, so as I'm going, please put questions, thoughts, comments into the chat. And I also really look forward to engaging with everyone on this topic more afterwards, and we can follow up through email. So I just wanted to start by highlighting what a special place that we live in, being in Texas. So, in the world, there are 1,487 species of bats. So, this is our most current count, incredible diversity around the globe. And in the United States, we have 44 species. And of course, Texas is the most diverse state for in bat species, and we have 33 bat species across the state. Especially because of where we sit, we get those western arid species and also those southeastern more swamp bats. So we have just incredible diversity of bats across the state. So I wanted to start off by showing you some of their incredible faces and adorable features. So our state flying mammal of Texas is the Mexican free-tail bat. So this is the guy that you would be seeing coming out of the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, or if you've been lucky enough to visit the largest bat cave in the world at Bracken Cave Preserve outside of San Antonio. These are the species that you're going to be very familiar with. Also, the species in Carlsbad Caverns. So these guys are very colonial in very high numbers throughout the state, but we have many other species aside from them. Tricolored bats are a focal species right now for a lot of work because of their being impacted by white nose syndrome. So if you're familiar with that, they are proposed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act, and we're waiting for that ruling any day now. So they are facing a lot of declines. So this is a focal species of research species across their range. We have other species like the big brown bat, very creative name. Evening bat, also a creative name. Some of our more migratory species like Seminole bats, hoary bats, and red bats. There's yellow bats. There's 33 of them. So hopefully you'll get a chance to learn more about those individual species in your area through other programs. But essentially, all bats everywhere are encountering artificial light at night. And this is a growing research topic because bats are nocturnal. We know that there's impact of artificial light at night, or ALAN, on essentially all taxa. I was just reading a paper on, the impacts of light pollution and artificial light at night from microbes to plants to vertebrates and fungi and all the way up to humans. So it's no surprise that a nocturnal taxa like bats are impacted. But we still have a lot to learn, just like we do with many other taxa, especially as light pollution is increasing in its pervasiveness and also as light technology changes, seeing like what we knew from mercury, halide lights and everything, it's now transitioning as things are switching over to LED lighting technologies. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit of a review of what has so far been learned about bats and kind of the negative impacts of light pollution on bats globally, and then also some of my own research. And then end with hopefully a conversation of where Dark Sky and Bat Conservation International can work together to align our missions and promote dark skies and bat conservation. So there's essentially impacts on light pollution or of light pollution on bats across all of their behaviors, whether it's foraging, drinking, roosting, their general movement to long distance migrations and reproduction. There's been research across various habitats from urban to forested, desert to coastal, and the broad theme is that it reduces bat activity and species richness. But we also see a lot of species specific impacts. And so we're still learning or figuring out how to tease all these different things apart and make recommendations for how to, address the needs of society with lighting while and reducing impacts on nocturnal organisms like bats. Um, and it's really going to be depend on that landscape composition. So I wanted to start by thinking about the diversity of bats and how they're impacted. And one of the ways we divide up our many species of bats globally is kind of by their niche and their diet. So insectivores make up about 70% of all bat species globally, and almost all of our species in the United States and Texas are insectivores. So there's that kind of impact of lights on their food source, their prey, insects, but then also on them. So there's been research showing that their foraging behavior and prey selection are impacted, that these species are going to delay their emergence, which then it reduces their foraging opportunities when there's light pollution. And then this also comes into play when we're talking about kind of the compounding effects. So insectivorous bats are the ones that are suffering from white nose syndrome in North America. And so if you have something like light pollution impacting their foraging opportunity, then that's going to have trickle down effects. That's going to then increase the impact of things like white nose syndrome. So it just adds to all the other stressors that they're already facing as well. Another group of bats that we do not have in the United States, but really through the tropics and into the old world, are frugivores, are fruit-eating bats that are very important for seed dispersal and things like forest regeneration. One really cool study showed that bats are actually less likely to eat fruit, even when they're dimly illuminated or under a street light. So it's not just that interaction between insects and insectivorous bats, but it's also going to impact frugivores and their less mobile prey. And it's going to be jeopardizing kind of natural forest succession because then these bats are going to be less likely to be traveling into lit areas and helping connect and alleviate the fragmentation in tropical landscapes. And then we also have nectivores, who are hummingbirds of the night out in West Texas into the deserts of the Southwest, down into Mexico. We have these beautiful nectivorous species that are important pollinators, especially for species like the tequila agave. And we've seen impacts on them from artificial light at night with reduced pollinator visits to illuminated plants. So things like this can happen when you have like lighting in botanical gardens or things for not for night visits, and then these species that rely on those plants even in managed gardens are going to be impacted. So bats drink just like we do, but they do it while flying. So they need kind of wide open sources of water. And so in Texas, a lot of times these are going to be tanks on private property, and but also open ponds. They need to be kind of calm water. So they have pretty specific needs for being able to access water while flying. And especially as we move into more arid areas, like going into West Texas and the Southwest, water can be a really limiting factor. And then obviously that's going to increase as we have airidification and everything from climate change. So we find that there's also an impact on their drinking activity. It's reduced in both forest and desert habitats when there's increased light pollution. So one of the things that we have to combat in the bat world is, and I imagine for entomologists as well, is that streetlights are beneficial to bats. So this is a really common misconception because so many people are used to going out at night, and that's one of the few times that they actually see bats, bats that are foraging on those congregations of insects around streetlights. So essentially, this has been, something that bats have been feeding on insects at streetlights since the 1920s when streetlights existed. So it seems like it's a good thing, it's easy prey right there. But the problem is that this is not true for all species. There are some bat species that are attracted to these lights and able to take advantage of the all the insects that are around there. But there are larger ecosystem impacts and an overall impact on the bat community and shifting them away from natural um, you know, prey compositions and everything. So I think I don't need to talk to this group much about, the impacts of artificial light and night on other taxa, but there's a lot of insects declining globally, and partially that is due to artificial light at night. Insects are attracted to shorter wavelengths and can have higher mortality at these light sources due to overheating, exhaustion, and really being sitting there as easy prey for things like bats. So it's not good for the insects. And while a few bat species might be able to benefit from these moths to the flame attracted to lights, it's only, like I said, a couple species, and I'll come back to that. Um, but over time, this is going to be have a negative impact on bats as we have continue to see insect declines due to this, including reduced reproduction, that then they're going to have lower prey availability. So we need healthy prey insect populations to be able to sustain bats. And I'm sure there's also value of the insects beyond just supporting bat populations, but yeah. One really interesting thing is that there's a whole group of moths that have ears and are able to hear bats echolocating, and they'll go into these power dive flight maneuvers when they hear bat echolocation. It's an incredible symbiosis through the adaptation of these moths being able to hear these bats. It's just incredible. And there was research in 2015 showing that there were fewer moths that were able to perform these evasive maneuvers when they detected bats, when they were in LED streetlight settings as opposed to dark settings. So we even have like impacts on incredible behaviors and interactions between bats and their prey that are being impacted by the presence of light. So aside from just impacting bats eating and drinking and their prey, artificial light at night has negative impacts on bats kind of movement through across the landscape. So it is fragmenting the landscape. Bats are going to be negatively impacted because as they're flying to where they need to go, they're going to be having to expend more energy to be avoiding lit areas. So areas that are well lit are essentially fragmented and not an area that a bat is going to want to fly through, so they're going to have to go around it. There's areas, particularly in Europe, with wildlife crossing structures, and there was research showing that bats are less likely to use those when they're lit. And it just, in general, disrupts bat activity and pushes them and confines them into these dark corridors instead of having a broader landscape to move across. So that ends up costing them more energy as they're doing what they need to do. So most of the research on bats and the impact of artificial light at night has come out of Europe and has been happening for quite some time. And it really started with as there was changes in light technology, they were looking at kind of how these different lights impacted bat species over there. So there has been research looking at UV emitting lamps that attract more insects and then consequently attract some bat species. So going back to that earlier point of bats and insects being attracted to lights. But and then we along that line, there would be higher activity at metal halide lights compared to the low pressure sodium street lights that we're really transitioning away from now. And now we're moving to LED. There's a lot of research into what that switch means. And every research paper that has been coming out shows that there's very species specific responses to LED, and even more so species specific to LED compared to like something like the older mercury vapor streetlights. Um, and what we've been seeing is that LED streetlights reduce the activity of slow flying bat species despite their energy saving benefits. So, and I'll talk more about this later with these flying bat species. But this really comes down to the spectrum um, of these lights and their makeup. So we have a couple different ways of looking at these with the wavelength of the light on the x-axis and the intensity of that wavelength on the y-axis. And so what we can see is that LED has these are going to be white LEDs that like we put in our house are going to get that white light by having this broad spectrum across all of these different wavelengths. But there's this big spike down in the cool wavelengths or the shorter wavelengths going into the UV area or area. Where older incandescent lights, while not energy efficient, and had that nice warm glow because they were predominantly had more intensity at that longer wavelength going towards the infrared spectrum. And then fluorescence kind of being across the middle. And then that low pressure sodium lights actually, while not energy efficient at all, were really the best in this context because they had this like single spike in this longer wavelength area. So a lot of what we're still learning is what bats are able to see and how species specific that is. But there's research showing that many species of bats are able to perceive light into the ultraviolet range, and have more sensitivity at these shorter wavelengths than down into the infrared longer wavelength range. And so a lot of research now is focusing on how color matters for bats. So again, there's very species specific responses, but and white and green lights are having negative impact on some slow flying bat species, but not red light. There has been evidence that red light does have negative impacts on a threatened bat species in the UK. So it's red light, while better than white and green light, is still not better than no light. You know, no light is still the optimum. One really interesting study came out showing that migratory bats are attracted to green and red light, but not warm white light. So again, showing evidence for that longer wavelengths, but it's not perfect. And then lastly, that kind of these natural activity patterns are less impaired by red light compared to white light. So there's kind of a mix of evidence across these different studies, particularly in species in Europe, showing that we want to be putting up lights that are in this longer wavelength, and this aligns with all the messaging for other things and like reducing light pollution in general to having these longer wavelengths, warmer tones, and really trying to prevent having these shorter wavelengths in our lighting to make it safer for wildlife. So we're kind of diving into these species specific responses a little bit. Um, my friend and I kind of were seeing that all of this research was coming out of Europe and not really anything from the US. And when it's so species specific, that means that we need to figure out how our species here are responding to light. And that generally we have these light tolerant species that tend to be faster flying and forage in open and edge space areas. So there's some discussion on whether there are light there are species that exploit light, like those bats that are going to be foraging on insects at streetlights, and then and really how to separate whether a bat is light tolerant versus light exploitative. But then we also have a large group of bats that we know that are light averse. And so these are going to be our slower flying species that tend to be foraging in narrow spaces. So they'll tend to be foraging in the forest as opposed to in an open field or above the forest. So to start teasing this apart in the US, we did a study at Great Hollow Nature Preserve and Ecological Research Center in Connecticut. And this preserve has been a dark space, has not had light at night. And we did a short-term study putting up some floodlights to look at this kind of acute um, light exposure on the bat community. And we used passive acoustic monitoring with bat detectors to measure the presence of bats, the relative bat activity, and community composition. And just skipping ahead to the results, we found that every species was responding differently. So we had hoary bats and eastern red bats, which really didn't have much of a difference between their light and dark. Like we didn't see any significant differences saying that that they were avoiding the light or not. So on these figures, we have our three um, scenarios. So a light when the lights are on, when the lights are off, and then a control location where there are no lights, and an activity index for that species. And so, yeah, no impact that we're seeing on hoary bats, which are a bat that we have in Texas, and eastern red bats. These are both going to be migratory species that are going to be foraging in open areas. Um, oops, sorry. So lighting did not affect the presence or absence of silverhair bats, but did decrease their activity. So we didn't have a significant presence or absence, but as you can see here in the dark, they had lower activity. So something is going on here that we weren't quite sure what was happening. Oh, yeah. And then here was our first significant result where we found a species that had significantly less activity when the lights were on. So these oh my goodness, sorry, big brown bats had lower activity when the lights were on than they did when the lights were off or when there were no lights at all. And we had an even more extreme response with little brown bats when, with the lights on, it went to almost zero activity and much higher activity when the lights were off. So this was kind of our first indicator for these North American species that we were going to see problems with lights. So we ended up having some light tolerant species, and this really fit what was being found in Europe with our open space foragers, and then light averse species being our little and big brown bat. So we took this to the next step, trying to look at kind of what is the cumulative footprint of disturbance caused by artificial light at night. Like, how far away from the lights does this impact stretch? And this was where we got some really surprising results. So we had these same lights up, and we had bat detector right under the lights, 25 meters away, 50 meters away, and 75 meters away. And at 75 meters away, like, to the human eye, we could not perceive any light at all. To us, it seemed completely dark. But what we found was that the bats could tell that there was a light still 75 meters away. And we found that these big brown bats, right at the light, they had lower activity when the lights were on than when the lights were off, just like we found in the original study. But really, as we moved away from the light, 25 meters, 50 meters, 75 meters, we didn't see any difference in activity. So big brown bats were sensitive right at the lights, but essentially as you moved away, they didn't care. But we did not see this with our more sensitive little brown bat. Essentially, there was no activity at the light, right at the light, and we saw lower activity all the way up to 75 meters away. So even at a distance to where we could not tell that the lights were on anymore, these bats were able to tell that they were there. So essentially, this is showing us that some of these light averse bat species, even if you have a light source and you're so far away that humans can't perceive that that light is on, it's still impacting animals. And it's going to impact animals that are, like, more sensitive. And so this is one of the species that is going to be proposed for listing as endangered because of white nose syndrome. So it's an animal that's already struggling, and now we have another stressor, artificial light at night, that is going to be reducing the area that they're going to be able to forage and commute in. So mitigating the impacts of artificial light at night is really important. And a lot of the messaging that dark sky promotes is important for bats as well. That lighting, for limited lighting during the night, so just a part night lighting is better than lighting throughout the whole night. That's going to have an impact on that's going to help these light sensitive species. The light type and color is going to make a big difference for bats. So there's even communities around the world that have started doing some lighting campaigns and switching lighting to red lights. As you can see in the Netherlands, Denmark, the UK, Sweden, some of them are actual like residential areas, and others are just like walking paths in nature reserves. So I just wanted to share very quickly an interesting kind of related research on this that we're working on. Um, so wind turbines are very deadly to bats. Bats are attracted to the turbines and will get hit by the blades, and millions are dying a year. And so wind energy development is the number one threat for migratory bat species in the world. But we still don't know why. So one of the hypotheses that we're actually working on testing is that the aviation lighting on these turbines are could be attractive to bats at these long distances, which aligns with a study that I had shared earlier that migratory bats are attracted to red and green light. So we're continuing to do research into the impacts of these red aviation lightings and if it's attracting migratory bats from long distances where you have this whole area that's has flashing red lights and if they're attracted to it for that. So just a piece of up and coming research related to artificial light at night, kind of from a different perspective. So from here, like that's a quick run through of what we know about bats and light pollution, which isn't much, and we're still continuing to do this, but we do know that has negative impacts on bats. So this is where I'm really excited to be talking with this group and thinking creatively about how we can align our messaging and our work to be benefiting bats as well as everything else that you're promoting by trying to protect the nighttime environment. So I've started talking to people and promoting getting involved with their regional dark sky chapters, and want to just keep working on that messaging. So one of the messaging from a bat research paper was that planting trees helps mediate the effects of artificial light at night by creating shading and a buffer from bats from that light. And it also can be a home for bat prey insects and a refuge. So this is some messaging that we're incorporating into our guide for gardening for bats. So looking for other kind of ways that we can incorporate this into our bat garden program and other programming to promote dark sky friendly projects. So there's a couple other resources out there that I can share the links to, but they're very dense. And again, they're also out of Europe and the UK, but just highlighting the work that's going on out there, looking into the impacts of artificial light at night on bats. So I would love to chat now, and so please unmute yourselves, introduce yourselves, and let's talk about how we can promote dark skies and bat conservation at the same time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank, thank you. That was very interesting. Where do you find the balance between the need for light and, the need for bats, I guess?
Um, well, I think this it's the same argument across all taxa, right? Like it's that, there's that issue with we're having lighting for human safety and things, but we all know that there's a lot of lights out there that have nothing to do with safety and is just like marketing and just pure pollution.
Can you give an example?
Oh yeah, like, lights in a parking lot, or along a street or a residential area are going to be are there for human safety and visibility, but a huge store sign that's lit up all night for a store that's not even open, that's generating a huge amount of light pollution for no purpose besides marketing.
Okay.
So
Or the lights in that parking lot could be left on after closing time and nobody's there. There's no reason to have those lights on if a person is not there. Yeah.
a big part is really just the thought in putting like what kinds of lights, what is the color of those lights, what is the temperature, and a lot of that there's not a whole lot of thought put into it besides I don't even know, like I think this is where we really need to be building partnerships with city planners, with engineers who are doing this planning and making these decisions and knowing how they're making those decisions. So there is some incredible research and work going on in this front. We have a mutual friend, Dr. Travis Longcore, who does incredible research and is working with groups like Caltrans and TxDOT to be looking at ways to model what a light design and how that light spread impacts the endangered species in particular areas and working with them to put in the appropriate designs based on the taxa there. But the hard thing is that we don't know about all taxa. Um, but I think the nice thing is that there's a lot of win-wins. A lot of the work that like the lights out groups do and dark skies do to protect birds during their nocturnal migrations, all of that work is beneficial for bats as well. So it's luckily we don't really need to make many changes that are specific for bats. It's more just adding them into the conversation and, you know, kind
Yeah.
of part of it's marketing on our part of saying, like someone might be like, "Oh, turn off your lights to save the birds." And I'm like, "Ah, who cares about birds? I'm just kidding. I know this is going online. I care." But really, if you say, "Oh, turn off your lights to save the bats," that's where you're going to get my heart and change my behavior. So some of it is just having different messaging that resonates with different people and then ends up changing behaviors in a bigger way. So
If I
just adding them into
could
the
add,
mix.
yeah, if I could
Please.
add that especially for a conservation group like I think we have here, that if you follow the 5 principles of responsible outdoor lighting, you've gone a long way to help protect many species. And when you do that, you protect, say, birds all year round. Our Lights Out program is specifically really designed to to get businesses on board. That's why the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. You guys know that birds start migrating at dusk.
Right.
So do your lights correctly. Do follow those 5 principles all the time. We have birds that are here all year round that need that natural darkness. But especially during migratory season, if there are a few of the lights that you may normally, have a good use for, but could turn them off. I know we'll pull our shades down at night if we have, when we have lights on in those rooms at the house. So there are a lot of things that we can do to help protect them. I want to let you know that we have several questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm looking through them. There's some great ones.
Okay.
I was I'll kind of go through and then any that I don't get to we can respond via email. But so I saw Julianne's question about what about trees that are lit up. So I'll ignore Christmas trees in this conversation, but there's a lot of bats that roost in trees. So having those really decorative lights that are illuminating trees, while I will say that it is beautiful, it is a very nice aesthetic to highlight our that natural wonder. It is potentially pretty negative for bats, but I will say the bats that roost in trees tend to have be pretty particular. So if like if you're gonna choose your battles, I would avoid illuminating really big old growth trees, um, and not really worry about the young like saplings or the smaller trees. They're really gonna be going for those older trees with like loose bark or big cavities. Um, so yeah, some of it's just picking your battles.
And for the trees, if I could add, there's some new research that we've pulled into a special presentation for people looking at plants, is that the trees with lights on them, those leaves end up being tougher, and the insects don't like them. So there won't be as many insects for the bats there.
That's fantastic. Ooh, yeah, there's so much there. Oh, there. I love this. This area of research is just incredible, and part of it is like we need to be kind of make like doing things that are interdisciplinary more. Um, So I see a question about how the studies are conducted, if they're in situ or in captive bats. I would say the research that I was talking about was mostly in with wild bats, and using bat acoustics and some camera observations for looking at how bats react when lights are up in the wild. But there have been studies in lab settings, in particular testing like their like the wavelengths that they're able to see. So like that study on which bats can see UV, that's in a lab setting. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, Catherine has, and there was a couple of things about like kind of residential lighting, like whether solar lights or motion detectors. So I would say like anything that reduces the amount of time that lights are on is good. So putting a timer on your lights so that it's just in, like the beginning of the evening when people are more likely to be coming by, but then it shuts off for the rest of the night when we're hoping everyone's sleeping. Motion detector is a great idea because then that's only on when people are around. And that's even some of like the smart technology gets even better because then it can they'll turn on if it detects like a person versus just any movement like a windy night. Solar lights do tend to be better, but they're really not just because they tend to be weaker and they don't necessarily last all night. But I'm really just speaking from my experience with cheap solar lights. So in general, solar lights are still producing light and can have the same impacts. It just really depends on the solar light you're talking about. Um, I have not seen any examples of motion triggered lights being triggered by bats. Um, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. Um, I love this question about the jellyfish lights or the more the decorative like colored lights or Christmas lights are on people's houses. Like I would say they're going to have a lower impact, partially because of the color spectrum that they tend to be in like warm colors. And even as you're selecting your holiday themed lights, like going for that warm white and colored lights versus the bright white light is going to be better, but at the end of the day, that it is producing light and contributing to light pollution. Like if you're ever flying into a city during the holidays, you can see those Christmas lights from the plane. Like it is still light pollution. So it's all about trade-offs and being aware of the choices you're making and trying to minimize your impact. Um, and yeah, just
And
continue
the jelly
making better
lights are being left
choices.
up all year round. And
Right.
that's a big issue.
Right. And so I think that so with those lights, again, like whether the choices, the best choice is always to not have lights And I say this as a person who loves decorative lights. So but what's nice again with those smart lights is have them turn off after a couple hours after sunset. Just don't have them going all night long until sunrise. So you can mitigate the impacts you're having just by making choices like that with your lights. Oh yeah, Stuart was saying that around Big Bend, the lighting is red, and in Hawaii, they have similar things. Yeah, you really see, and I grew up in California, and we had an observatory, and so our cities switched to amber lights decades ago. It still baffles me how many cities have not made this switch. It's an easy switch. So I think that's a huge like advocacy piece, especially when you're talking about it kind of municipal, like bigger levels outside of people's homes, is just in those areas where you have to have lights for that human safety component. Try and have those warmer lights, the yellows, the oranges, and the reds as much as possible. So that's where, yeah, West Texas, because it was at McDonald Observatory, has the darkest skies in Texas, right? Because of all of the hard work, a lot of it because of Dark Sky Texas. So,
And
yeah.
you're right about human safety, that we need it to see, but we can target it, we can follow those principles. It does not reduce crime. I noticed that there's some people who um, have talked about that, and that is a myth. That has been proven time after time by professional studies that it does not reduce crime.
No.
In fact, it often attracts crime.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the
Uh,
burglars can see. They don't have to bring, or anybody with ill intent can see. They don't even have to bring their own flashlights.
I can tell you from personal experience, people look at you really weird when you walk around with a headlamp on. I don't know. It's not normal. Sarah made a fantastic point about shielded lights. So that's another piece of having light fixtures that have the light pointing down instead of just like a beam shooting straight up into the sky. There's a lot of messaging and work around this kind of like light pollution, and there's the focused area and like the area that's intended to be lit, and making sure that light shield is functioning there, but then preventing that spread. Yeah, there's so much we could keep talking about. Does anyone have any thoughts on kind of the ways that you talk about artificial light at night, and you could see ways to bring bats into the kind of the education and outreach that you're already doing around dark skies and protecting our night environment?
Think it might be beneficial if when we're doing BCI tabling events that we have dark sky materials in them.
Agree.
I'm doing a BCI table this weekend and I will for sure talk about this.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Where will you be,
Yes,
Steph?
great.
Can we get you
I'll
some
be in
materials?
I'll be in Austin at it's only a 2 hour one, but then doing another one. Oh goodness. I feel like I do them like every other weekend. I'm doing another one on the 26th all day in San Antonio. So
Wonderful.
as long as it gets into the bins, or actually I'll have the bin from Bracken this weekend. So if I can meet anybody between now and then or after that, I can get all the material into the bin.
Yeah,
Um,
I think if we can
I can
even
get it to you.
share the
Yeah,
files, like we can share some of our info sheets, and then the same thing, and then we can print them for our tabling events and vice versa. That'd be really
yeah.
nice.
Steph, would you send me your phone number in just in do a message to me at, I'm listed under Dark Sky, Texas.
Yes.
Yes, send, and I'll send you mine, and then we can talk. I've got the materials, the outreach materials at my house.
I love that stuff.
Awesome.
I'm gonna work on the same. And thank you for doing all the tabling for both.
Oh, I love it.
Uh, I do
I
too.
love it.
I do too. Yeah. So, and that's, I mean, a couple, yeah, like there's a couple plugs. April 17th is International Bat Appreciation Day. So go out and, try and do, if you do dark sky outreach, add bats, into your focus on that day, on your personal social media. You can share about bats with all of your friends that are are familiar with dark sky, but not with bat conservation. So I think we can promote each other's message. And I've been working with our social media team to be promoting Dark Sky Week. And we have plenty of time to be planning how Dark Sky Texas and Bat Conservation International could partner up for Bat Appreciation Week in October, the last week of October. So there's lots of overlap, and I think that yeah. So
I'd like
I
to say something.
please, yeah,
If you if telling us, I mean, I know why, but most people don't know why bats are lovely.
yes,
You know the
that's
benefits of bats, of
we
what the
have.
goodness, the mosquitoes and the pollinating and all that stuff. And Cindy, if you could pronounce the 5 principles of lighting, because you know them inside out and back to front, but most people don't. So it's really educating for, I mean, if most little old ladies are not very interested in bats, but if they knew why they were so wonderful, they'd turn their lights off.
You're so right, Sarah. You're very right. And if you go to darkskytexas.org, under our resources and on our bold initiative page, you'll find the 5 principles. I can do them very quickly for you. One is make sure every light is useful. If it doesn't have a purpose, get rid of it. The second is to shield every light so that it's targeted where you need that light. The third is to use the least amount of light that you need for that task. The fourth is to have it on controlled, timed. We've talked about that, motion detectors, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's just a switch so that oh, I can cut it on when I need it. I don't need that light very often, and then I'll cut it off. And the fifth one is to have the warmest color temperature that you can have. I love the pictures that Amanda had of the streets and trails with the amber lighting. There's one in at least one in Austin now, from Rainy Street to 35. The trail along
Amazing.
Lady Bird Lake is narrowband amber. So that thank you, Sarah, for for, for asking for that.
It's funny. I have that in my slides, but I didn't feel like I needed to share it with this group. But it's a good point. We should keep saying it over and over and over again because it can't be said enough.
Yeah.
And
And
those 5 principles are so great.
their order of importance are the order that they're listed.
Right.
It's important to do it in order, not jumble them around.
Okay. Um, yeah. Katie had a good question if we recommend bat houses. So I just had put in there that in general, we don't like bat houses aren't bad, but for most bat species, it's not a conservation tool. It's more valuable for engagement. So if you have frequent backyard barbecues and you put up a bat house and every single person that comes to your house is like, oh, what's that? You're like, that's my bat house. And you tell them how important bats are. That's where the conservation impact is coming from, by sharing that messaging on how important bats are. And so really kind of what we've been promoting is our Gardening for Bats program. So, and in Texas is where we have our best species lists. Our first one was worked on with the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And so I'm putting a link in the chat right now, and there's a list. So we have a list of Central Texas plants, Coastal Texas plants, that can go into a back garden to promote a healthy insect populations or nocturnal insect populations for bats to feed on and keep them fat and happy. But like I said before, we're gonna need to add in there, do not light your back garden. Like, I feel like it goes without saying, but it really doesn't. Yeah. So thank you all so much for spending your evening with us and learning about bats. Please tune in to our Bat Conservation International webinars for more information on bats, and feel free to follow up with Cindy or myself if you want to keep engaging and looking for ways to work on developing this partnership between Dark Sky Texas and BCI.
Yeah.
And thank you all that are master naturalists for all the amazing work that you do as well. Have a good night.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate everyone being here, and we're going to say good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.